his pants off, with much difficulty as he refused to help them, and actually would make it harder for them to remove them. There was no obvious break, no blood, just bruises all up and down his side. Lisa kept asking him what happened, but he would grunt and wave her hands away from the bruises. My dad said he's fine, let's just sleep. My mom gave him the, "Are you fucking kidding me?" look, and he gave her the "Do it woman" look. That's right, old school and still working as fuck, and so she complied, as he never does that, and they went to their tent. They say they heard Lisa nagging and one-sided arguing with Danny because he would never reply when she would ask him questions, which I just think is a genius wife enraging tactic, and so she finally yelled she's going to pee. Danny asked if he could come with her since there were animals out there, in not so many words. She said okay, and they left. My dad woke up about 10-ish in the morning and started making breakfast. Danny and Lisa were gone. My mom asked where they were, but my dad wouldn't reply. After a little while, they both came back, rather unceremoniously and without word. They weren't holding hands or in each other's arms, or arm over the shoulder or anything like they always were, just kind of awkwardly standing next to each other. They refused food and Danny would randomly yell out my leg, and Lisa kept complaining of feeling ill. My mom suggested they go home and call off the trip on account of Danny's leg, who had not been limping at all, to my mom's horrified recollection, and the two nodded. My father just kind of watched. They all agreed, so Danny and Lisa got in my parents' car, not theirs, and just waited. Didn't pack up their tents, food, coolers, bags, anything. My mom came over and asked if they were going to grab their things, and they shook their heads. My dad asked, "Why don't you take your car?" And they both said broken, just like Danny had last night, in a creepy practiced way. My dad signed and packed up the car and they drove off. Danny and Lisa stayed quiet the whole way there except for random mumblings to each other, completely indecipherable. My parents took them home and came and got me, and we could all tell something was wrong, besides coming back days early. They said Danny got hurt, so they came home. This part on is from me now. After they all got home, I asked if we could go see them, but my dad replied, no, a little too quickly, and so I thought he was mad at me, so I left to go play PlayStation. I remember cause I missed them, and then he was mean. So I snuck back upstairs and listened from the stairwell, and overheard my parents and grandparents talking about how something wasn't right. It was like those stories, yada yada yada. I assumed they were talking about something random and got bored and went to go play more PlayStation. A few weeks later I asked about Uncle Danny, and my dad said we're not going to see them anymore. I was mad, and so I demanded to know why. He told me something about his dad being sick, and so I was sad. Then I forgot about it and life went on. Fast forward about 5 years. I'm at a supermarket where I used to live when all this happened. It was also by where Danny and Lisa lived, only on the other side of the road. Being 10 I was never allowed to go over, but now, old house, check out Danny and Lisa's house. I'm a nostalgic person, and see the only neighborhood. I'm driving slowly and rather creepishly down my old street when I spot Danny walking down the street. Excited as fuck I flag him down, pull over and get out to talk to him. He seemed stiff to me, kind of robotic I guess you could say, when he hugged me, but it was way too tight and it felt like he was trying to smother me. I asked him how he'd been and he said alright. I asked him where Lisa was and he said at home, so I asked if I could see her, and he agreed. I walked with him and asked him about all kinds of people and tried to catch up, but he didn't remember, or didn't care about 90% of it, which seemed odd, because Danny was always my awesome involved Uncle Danny. Also I'm on /x/ so I'm automatically paranoid and shit. So I asked him a couple obvious trick questions and he failed miserably, and now I'm a bit nervous. We get to his door and he opens it and the smell of a goddamn meat locker pours out. A horrid incomparable smell just assaults my nostrils. The place is a wreck, shit is just everywhere, everything is coated in dust and shit and nothing looks clean. Laundry is everywhere, no lights are really on, it's a mess. I'm more than a little freaked out and I asked what happened here, and he grunted, a really weird, almost guttural grunt. So I asked after Lisa and she yelled from the kitchen, which was just behind the wall facing the room I was in. It wasn't a full wall, with the top not touching the ceiling, so I could smell and hear something cooking. I walked into the kitchen expecting to see Lisa making some normal food, and planning on asking Lisa why Danny was acting weird, but what I saw was unforgettable. She's standing in the kitchen, butt-ass naked, covered in blood, cooking some kind of mangled mess, surrounded by thousands of bones. I was just smart enough to notice a pile of motherfucking collars in the corner. Though not until after I intentionally remembered this at home, fucking pet collars. I yelled and Danny lunged at me. I kind of sidestepped away from him clumsily and ran out the door. Danny gave chase and I got to the car and noped the fuck as fast as my little blazer could go. I got home, called the police, gave them the address, and went straight to my dad. He punched me in the face and told me he overheard the address. I tried to apologize and he yelled at me, so I yelled at him for lying to me, so he hit me again, then hugged me and said he was sorry. I tried to ask him but he, rather strongly, told me to shut the fuck up and forget about it. The police came to my house and told me they didn't find anyone living there, but that my story matched the description and the place was a fucking nightmare. They told me they suspected the previous owners left in a mixture of wild animals and burglaring homeless people had been living there. My dad, being the fucking ridiculous genius he is, asked why the house hadn't been foreclosed or bill payments hadn't been an issue. The cops stammered then said they'd look into it. Apparently Danny's father had still been paying for it all, as per some agreement when they got married. I still haven't seen them since, and my dad only once told me the story beforehand. My meeting up with them was pure coincidence, and only made the story worse. A couple years after all that happened me dad told me this story, got drunk and in his drunken stupor that night told me he knew what would happen to Danny. He knew what they were. Better him than my dad. I don't expect to be believed, I'm just going to tell the story and go. 19, male, Arizona. When I was young I had to live with my dad in a caravan park in the desert at the edge of some dirt poor hick towns. Pick sadly related the people there were basically 100% white trash burnouts, the most depressing kind of environment for a kid to grow up in. Dad was alright, he drank but wasn't angry, worked a lot and didn't really care what I did. He was a demolition worker and would sometimes be gone for days at a time. During these times I would stay in this one van with a family of 3 who we were pretty close to. There was the dad, John, and the 2 sons, one my age, Michael, and one a year younger, who, no shit, was called Dog. Now even in that setting Dog was a weird name. Like there were literally people with the name Cletus there and even they laughed at the name Dog. But the family was really nice nonetheless. I hardly saw the dad because he worked and drank like my own father, so it was usually me, Michael, and Dog mucking around at the caravan camp doing whatever we liked. Michael and Dog were nice kids, but I'd had a little bit of education having spent a few years with my mom in the city, and by comparison these kids were pretty simple. Their idea of fun was catching lizards and mashing them up with sticks. Which was a good way to kill time, though. They also had a PS1 with some games, but it always glitched out. The main thing I remember about hanging around them was the smell of their caravan in the heat. This really rancid stench would build up as we played PlayStation or mashed lizards or whatever. The hotter the day the worse it was. So one day I asked them what the smell is all about and they said they'd show me. So they take me into the back section of the caravan, which is cordoned off from the rest by one of those sparkly bead curtains, and that's how I found out their dad was into taxidermy. There were buckets of roadkill and his taxidermy handiwork lined the walls. The windows had been fully taped over with black duct tape and it was actually bubbling in the heat, leaking this thick plastic-type smell that mixed in with the smell of meat. I saw most of the taxidermied animals were lizards and realized why they were all about killing lizards. I was creeped out, but after a time I didn't notice the stench so bad and became interested in how well crafted the animals were. The sculptures all had real craftsmanship and talent, or so I thought as a kid. In retrospect, they were pretty crude. So I'm admiring the taxidermy when the door slams shut and I almost shit myself when John is standing over me, staring hard at me and his kids. But then he just bursts out smiling and acting like a giddy child eager to know what I think. He seemed so happy when I said I liked it. As a kid you sort of don't have a broad enough awareness of social norms to know that taxidermy is pretty creepy. Another thing I didn't notice at the time was that even though he was incredibly nice and warm to his sons, they both acted totally submissive and treated his every word as an order. When he asked if I would like a beer, for instance, they both said yes sir and rushed to the fridge, but he just laughed and they were smiling, so I didn't suspect anything was wrong. That night we made a small fire outside and all got drunk. Me, Michael and Dog were kids, so it didn't take much. We huddled around the fire as John enthusiastically started telling us the story of how Dog was born. He'd had a truly beautiful mother, he said, who loved Michael more than the world. Michael didn't remember his mother and the story made him sad. Their mother and John had lived in a nice house in a different state, and when she got pregnant a second time it was like a miracle, he said. Then a glaze crossed over his eyes and his voice got whimpery. But before Dog was born, Mother had buckled to the floor and blood was coming out of her, and when they got to the hospital, no sooner had Dog been born was she dead. We all got a bit teary-eyed, John especially. He hugged his son Dog. "Mommy died so we could have you, my baby boy," he said, and his son cried. They both cried and held each other. But I noticed Michael was smiling widely. He turned to me and said, "Daddy's going to make everything alright again." Hearing him, his father said, "Yes, so I will make everything alright again." And they had me join them in a family hug. As we hugged, something bad happened. John suddenly yelled and thrust us all off him. He smashed his bottle on the ground and started breathing heavily. Dog tentatively approached him and started asking what was wrong. His father turned to him with wild eyes as bright as the fire and screamed at him not to talk like that. "What did I tell you about talking, Dog?" Dog started stammering, falling over his own feet into the gravel. I was too woozy to think straight, and as I watched this horrible sign, Michael put his hand on my knee and squeezed. John approached the boy and hit him on the neck until he cried out in protest, making John hit him again and scream. "What did I tell you? Dogs don't talk." And Dog, on his hands and knees, tears running down his face, started whimpering like a pup. And then he was barking. And then howling. John hit him again on the neck and said louder. Dog, living up to his namesake, frantically woofed and barked, running around in the sand on all fours. John seemed happy with this and seized the boy under the stomach. He sharply ordered his other son to follow and they disappeared inside. Before he left, Michael shot me a big grin, the same smile he'd given when he said everything would be alright. For a long time I didn't see them. I told my father about what happened and he said he'd talk to John about his drinking, but that was all he could do. "You can't tell people what's good for them," he said resignedly. I saw Michael a couple more times, killing lizards behind my caravan. We exchanged hellos but nothing more. Then I saw him one more time, a few days later, on one of the hottest days I remember. He looked really satisfied and was strutting around the caravan lot whistling to himself. When I approached, I saw